Hi, hello, welcome. It's time for a reading wrap up. So I have decided that I'm going to start doing these semi-monthly instead of monthly. It's just what I'd rather do. So just a heads up. So this is going to be the wrap up for June and May. I did read 10 books these last 2 months. So I figured the best way to split them up to talk about them was going to be just to split them up by age category. So that's what I'm going to do. So I'll start with middle grade, then I'll move to young adult, and then I will move to adult. And I guess let's just get started. So let's start with the middle grade section. Okay, first up is Artemis Fowl by Eoin Colfer. So this is technically the first book in the Artemis Fowl series. It's just called the Artemis Fowl series. This book is about a boy genius, Artemis Fowl, who is a criminal mastermind, and he decides that he is going to try and steal fairy gold in order to reclaim his family fortune. Well, he's not really reclaiming, he's stealing from the fairies to try and get his family's wealth back, like to put his family back in wealthy status. That was the most convoluted way of saying it. And of course, the fairies do not take kindly to this, so there's a huge struggle between the two factions. So Artemis Fowl, I rated this book 3 out of 5 stars. I didn't hate it, but I also didn't love it. I just thought it was a really cool concept. Like, I personally really like fairies and fairy lore and fairy tales and all this kind of stuff, but the execution of the idea just wasn't there for me. I think that the attention of the book was divided too much between Artemis and the fairies that we never really got a good look into either side, I feel like. So it just kind of felt like whiplash going back and forth without ever having a focus. I think that it just really has the potential to be really good. And I have heard that the series kind of goes downhill later on. So it's kind of sad because I think that this could have been built up to something really good and cool. But yeah, and I'm not going to be continuing on with the series. I just don't really care about it too much. And after hearing that it doesn't turn out to be very good in the end, like, yeah, I'm just not gonna do it. But yeah, like the plot goes at such light speed. So by the end of the book, it almost felt like because we had rushed through everything and there was hardly a resolution at the end, like hardly a denouement at all, it felt like this was almost the first half of a book instead of a whole book. Like we're just gearing up to the midpoint and then there's going to be an explosive last half. But that never came, obviously. The pacing is so fast. Like, I just feel like we got from the beginning to the end in way too short of time. And I know this is a middle grade book, so the word count is generally a little bit shorter, but it was too fast to me. And I remember actually reading this as a kid. I did read this when I was younger. And I remember getting to the end of this book and just feeling like confused. Like, what the heck just happened? I think not only because it is so fast paced, but also the author puts in these concepts that I think are really hard for middle grade readers to grasp. Like, first of all, time travel type of things. Like, it's not exactly time travel, but there's a time travel like element that I as an adult was even confused about. I can't even imagine what younger readers think of it. And there's also just like kind of some physics-y stuff, especially with the fairies and their kind of inventions and workings and all that stuff that I also thought was confusing as an adult. Like, I just skimmed over it, but I don't know how kids would feel about it. I mean, I read it as a kid and I remember being confused. So I almost kind of wish this was more like young adult or adult maybe. Then I kind of wonder if it would have been better received by me personally. Anyways, it was kind of a disappointing book. I didn't really love it. So yeah, that's unfortunately how I felt about Artemis Fowl. So the second and final book in this section is Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. If you have not ever heard of Harry Potter, which I'm sure most everyone has, so just in case someone has been living under a rock, this is about a teen boy who finds out that he's a wizard and goes to a magical boarding school called Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. And in this book, it's Harry's 3rd year at Hogwarts. There's a crazed criminal on the loose that just got out of Azkaban, as hinted at in the title, and he's after Harry. And we get all these new things like new classes, new creatures. It's just an expansion, 3rd book. So this book I rated 5 stars, 5 out of 5. I really enjoyed it, as I have the previous 2. I gave those 5 stars too. I really liked this one. I think that I don't like it as much as Chamber of Secrets. I don't know about Sorcerer's Stone, but I still really, really enjoyed it. This entry in the Harry Potter series has always felt a little weird to me. Not in a bad way, just like it's just different because the main villain of the series is not present in this one at all. It's the only one of the 7 where this is the case. And it always has felt like it's just weird. I don't know. It's like it just feels different. And again, not in a bad way at all, but it like puts me a little out of sorts still. But even, besides that, there is a ton of stuff to love in this book. We get new creepy elements. Like I feel like the books just keep getting creepier and creepier, which is kind of fun. There's a divination class, which is honestly kind of creepy. There's the Dementors, there's Azkaban. And the big thing about this one is that there's a huge reveal about Harry's past, and not the past in the sense of like his life, but of his parents' life. Like we learn kind of more about his parents' life, and it's very interesting and it's very cool. And it's like the huge climax of the book, kind of. Speaking of climax, this one had kind of a weird climax. The climax of Chamber of Secrets was so good and exciting. It was like a proper climax of a book. This one was a little different just because if you know, but there's like almost a fake one and then a real one comes afterwards. And it's all just like a very interesting kind of style of plotting and pacing. And I don't think it's bad necessarily. It's just, as I said before, it's just different. This is the only book that's like this. I will say though, that Quidditch is a huge deal in this book. Like there's a whole subplot with Quidditch stuff, and it's very interesting and it's really exciting. And it's something that they kind of cut out of the movie. I remember that not being a big deal in the movie, and it very much is in the book. And I loved that little subplot. And I also am going to officially say, I'm going to stake my claim here. I like Dumbledore in the books so much better than in the movies. He just has such a different presence in the books. He's like so much more warm and grandfatherly kind of in the books than he is in the movies. I just love him so much in the books. And there is this one scene at sort of the end-ish of the book between Harry and Dumbledore that like made me cry. It was so sweet and like so touching. It was really, really nice. And this is the first time that that's happened with Harry Potter as this reread through as an adult. But yeah, again, I really, really liked this one. It was a very good time. I'm really enjoying this reread through of Harry Potter, and I'm excited to get to the next one. Okay, now let's move on to the young adult section. The first book I have is The Mortal Engines by Philip Reeve, which is the first book of a quartet, and I've seen it called both the Mortal Engines Quartet and the Hungry City Chronicles. I don't know why, if it's like a UK versus a US thing or what, but anyways, it's the first book in that series. And it's about a future Earth where cities are no longer stationary, and all the big ones have now evolved to roaming mobile cities that travel around the land, claiming smaller cities. So it's a whole thing that they call municipal Darwinism. So the big cities eat smaller cities, the smaller cities eat even smaller cities, and the smallest cities just eat the stationary towns. It's like sort of steampunkish. It's really cool. It's a very cool concept. I actually really liked it. That's what made me want to read this book, is because I loved the concept of the world so much. And this story is about our main character, Tom, who works in the Historical Society of London, the mobile city London, and he witnesses a crime, and he is now deemed to have seen too much, and he's basically pushed off the city into the wastes, and he has to try to get to the bottom of this crime, essentially. I rated this one 3 out of 5 stars. So it's kind of like Artemis Fowl. I didn't hate it, but didn't love it. I really have a strong feeling with this one that it's better for younger readers than it is for adults. And the reason for that is because the prose is so juvenile sounding. That's not a bad thing at all. I want to make that very clear. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just that as an adult, it's almost too easy of a reading level. And that's why I think maybe it would be better for a younger reader, which it's written for. So, it's really my fault. But at the same time, I think there's value in having books written for younger readers that can be enjoyed by adults. So like, I don't know, there's an argument either way there that I'm not going to get into right now. But anyways, I just will say that the prose is kind of my biggest negative about this book. I also want to say that there's something like, I don't know whether you would consider this middle grade or young adult. I see it classified as both on Goodreads, on the Goodreads page. At my library, it was in the young adult section, which I think is where it kind of fits thematically because of the character journeys and also the fact that there's quite a bit of violence in this book. Like there's a body count in this book, but the writing style is like kind of more middle grade-ish just because it's so utilitarian. So I don't know. It's a very confusing type of book. It's very confusing. On top of that, the plot is not really super engaging. I didn't find any of the characters really all that sympathetic. They're just too simple. There is nuance to them. Let me just say there is like some complexity there, but it's not really explored all that much. So it's just weird. I think if you wanted to read a book that's just going to be a purely fun adventure story, you'd probably have a good time with this. If you didn't really care about characters like I do, I think it'd probably be a fun time. But it's super cliche. It's very predictable. It just didn't work for me at all. And I'm not going to continue on with this one either. I don't care about the story. I don't care about the characters enough to keep following them. So this is it. Okay, the next book is These Violent Delights by Chloe Gong. This is the first book in a duology, and it's a retelling of Romeo and Juliet set in 1920s Shanghai. So there's two rival gangs in this one. It's kind of like Romeo and Juliet with the rivaling families, but here it's gangs. Basically, you have the whole Romeo and Juliet-ish thing going on, and in the backdrop, there's this weird plague thing that's going on that's kind of running through the streets of Shanghai, dropping people left and right. So the main characters, the Romeo and Juliet characters, have to try to get to the bottom of this plague and figure out what's causing it and how to stop it. So I gave this book 1 star. I don't feel great about that. I never give 1-star ratings, okay? It's like totally a once in a blue moon type of thing to me. But this book, there was not a single thing about this book that I thought was good or I liked in any way. I almost DNF'd it. I was very close so many times, but I kept going because I wanted to see how Chloe Gong was going to connect it to Romeo and Juliet. And I especially wanted to see how she was going to end it, if she was going to stick to tradition and end it the same way that Romeo and Juliet ends, or if she's just going to kind of half-ass it and, have a happy ending. But of course, I didn't even get an answer because this is the first of a duology. So I have to read the next book now. So I am going to probably make a separate video on this book, on this duology. So I'm not going to say too much in this section. But what I will say is that it was very boring. The prose was borderline unreadable to me. The world building was just so clunky. There was just so much exposition dumped at us randomly. It's like the author decided to just go off on a tangent sometimes and be like, by the way, blah, 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 this thing about 20s Shanghai. Like, I don't care about that. It doesn't matter to the story. The characters were possibly the worst part. And that's mainly because Juliet, the main character, was awful. The worst character, I'm not exaggerating. I think the worst protagonist I've ever read. I hate her with a burning passion. Having to follow her through this entire book was pure torture. The Romeo character, Roma, was a wooden board. He had absolutely no personality. He had no dimension. He had no character. They were quite a pair, those two. And then every other character was also really flat and boring, so it was not good. The romance was really boring. There was like no chemistry between the two leads. And the most important part of this, I think, the retelling aspect of it, seems to be kind of a complete failure, in my opinion. I don't know why this is a retelling of Romeo and Juliet. I don't know why she chose that story other than the fact that she just likes it. I'm probably going to dive deeper into that and what I mean by that in my other video that I'm going to do on this. So I'm not going to go too much into that now, but this book was not great for me. Not great. Let's move on to the next one. So now I'm going to get into the manga series I read these past few months because they were all shonen. So they technically fit into the YA category. So the manga I read has been Bleach and One Piece. So first, let me talk about Bleach. I have made a video on Bleach. I was talking about the Soul Society arc. I have read through the Soul Society arc now, so watch that video if you're interested. It's very good. I am still really liking it so much. The Soul Society arc was great. It was absolutely wonderful. I loved it. And now I'm on the Arrancar. I don't know how you pronounce that one. I'm gonna have to look it up. But I finished the first part of that arc, the Arrival, and so I'll be making a video about that. And it's still going great. I'm liking that arc already now too. So yeah, One Piece. One Piece has been a struggle. I have not really gotten into it. I was watching the anime and I didn't like it. It was too slow. So I switched to the manga and I'm up through volume 12 now. I don't remember which arc that is. I'll put it on screen, but I'm just not clicking with this one. I don't think I want to go into all the reasons why, because I'm probably going to start going off on tangents and ranting, and I just don't want to do that in this video. It's going to make it way too long. I don't know about One Piece. I don't know if I'm going to continue on with it. I might just call it not for me and move on. I got through essentially what was the first season of the anime now, up through the manga, and 12 volumes in, I would think that I would have started to like it by now, if I'm ever going to like it in the future. So I think I'm going to call it quits with One Piece. And it feels so sad to say because it's so beloved and so popular, but I just don't want to invest that kind of time in something that I'm not going to be fully into and loving. But anyways, that's kind of my thoughts on One Piece, my experience with One Piece. Okay, young adult is done. Let's move on to the adult books now. All right, so the first book I want to talk about is Best Served Cold by Joe Abercrombie. This is the fourth book chronologically in his first law world, but it also is a standalone, so it's not technically part of a series. It's just set in this first law world that his previous trilogy was also set in. So this book is about a woman who was betrayed and left for dead by people she thought she could trust, and she vows revenge on these 7 men, and this book is about her kind of finding that revenge. It's very good. I rated this book 5 out of 5 stars. I absolutely loved it. I also have a video where I ramble on about this book for like 20 minutes. So I'm going to keep this pretty short and sweet because if you really want to know all my thoughts, you can watch that video if you're interested at all. But I really love this one. I love the characters. I mean, obviously it's Abercrombie. He has amazing characters. I don't think there was a single one in this book that I didn't like in some way or find interesting. They're all so good. The plot of this one was so much tighter and more typical of like, it hit a lot of more story beats than the first Law trilogy, which like basically had no plot. This book was so much stronger in the plot department. The pacing was really good. His battle and fight scene writing is still just so great. I love his battle scenes. It was very exciting up till the end. I was super invested the entire time, and it's a pretty big book, so I call that a win. So overall, I really, really loved this book, and I'm really excited to get to the next standalone, The Heroes. I just love Joe Abercrombie's book so much. The next book is Rebels at Sea by Eric J. Dolin. So this book is actually a nonfiction book. This is the first nonfiction book I have read in years, and the first nonfiction book that I read voluntarily also in years. So this book is about privateering during the American Revolution, and privateers, which I did not even know what they were before this book. Like I had heard the term, but I never really knew what they were. Privateers are essentially these sailing vessels that are commissioned by the government during times of war to sort of act as an extension of the Navy. They are private. They're always private vessels that have like an agreement with the government, basically, to be able to raid enemy ships. They're an extension of the military. They just fight the enemy. So this book just kind of compiles different stories about different privateers during the American Revolutionary War. I rated this book 4 out of 5 stars. It was kind of weird for me. I didn't know exactly how to rate it, so I just gave it 4 stars. I didn't want to give it 5 because I wasn't completely invested in the book, but I also didn't want to give it any below that because I thought it was a really good, well-rounded book. It did what it set out to do. It just feels like that's how you judge nonfiction books. So I don't read enough nonfiction to know whether it's all that good or bad. So maybe in the future I'll read other nonfiction books and I'll come back to this one and be like, what the hell was I thinking? But anyways, for now I rated it 4 stars. I thought it was very interesting, actually. Like, as I said before, I actually learned what privateering is through this book. So I know that now. But as I said, I just think it was really interesting. All the different stories that the author kind of put forth were so wild, some of them, like all very interesting in their own ways. It's a side of the revolution that I didn't even know existed. It was a huge part of it. And the variety of different accounts and showing kind of the good and bad sides of it, the wins and the losses, the positive and the negative. It was all very interesting. It was also kind of fun because since privateers weren't officially part of the Navy, they got a little more wild, and some of the stories were very interesting. I'm gonna just put that forward. I will say it did get a little repetitive after a while. There was not really a narrative, you know what I mean? Which is fine. This is a nonfiction. It's not a fiction book, so it's just not what I was used to. So it's kind of a little hard to get acclimated to it. But yeah, overall, I think if you're at all interested in kind of nautical things or ships or the Revolutionary War, even the American Revolutionary War, I think this would be a great book to read and I would recommend it. Okay, the next book is Guards by Terry Pratchett. This is the 8th Discworld book, I believe, 8th overall in the Discworld series, but it's the first book in the City Watch sub-series of Discworld, which is why I read it. So this book is about the Ankh-Morpork City Watch, the Night Watch of the city. And they are a very downtrodden organization. Their numbers are sparse. They're not looked upon favorably. They're just not having a great time. They're kind of the cannon fodder. I think Terry Pratchett actually puts a note in the beginning about how like these characters would be kind of the nobodies in any other story. So he's writing about them. He's making them the focus of this story. And I thought that was really funny. So what happens in this book is that a dragon is summoned and it becomes crowned king of the city, and the City Watch kind of has to figure out how to save the city from it. I rated this book 5 out of 5 stars. I freaking loved it. My experience with Discworld so far has just been phenomenally positive. I have loved it. So this is now the 4th Discworld book I've read. Previously, I read the 3 Moist Fun Lip Fig books. Loved those as well. I love all the characters in this one, especially Samuel Vimes. I think he's the most interesting one to me. So I'm excited to see more of him because I know he's a prominent character in Discworld. I like Nobby Knobs. I love Sergeant Colon. I loved Carrot too. I loved the woman. What was her name? Lady Ramkin. I loved Lady Ramkin. Oh my gosh. The librarian. Oh, wonderful. And also, of course, Lord Vetinari. I love the characters. They were all so endearing, all the main characters. It was such a good story. The thing I really, really appreciate about Discworld is just how unique the stories are in it, as far as my experience thus far. Even if he kind of reuses some tropes or some like kind of storylines that have been used in the past, he always puts his unique spin on it. I appreciate Discworld so much. It makes me excited to get to all the other stories in the other books in Discworld to just see how they're going to go. But yeah, I loved everything about Guards. It was so short and sweet too. It never overstayed its welcome. And it was so funny. Oh my gosh. The society of whatever that like society, you know what I'm talking about if you read the book. So freaking funny. I actually laughed out loud almost every time there was a scene with them. So good. Also, I just have to say, Terry Pratchett's prose is so good. It's all just so intentional. He picks every word so carefully. You can just tell. So while Discworld is so fun and light, there's also just like so much simmering beneath the surface that they're so interesting. All these books so far have been so interesting. And I can't wait to continue on in Discworld. And I have decided from this point forward that I am going to start reading Discworld in chronological order instead of by sub-series, which is what I had been doing. I was kind of looking into it online and looking at other people's opinions, and I kept seeing a lot of people recommend reading it chronologically. So I think that's what I'm going to do. And I know that the caution that is always given is that his first books are a little rough. He hasn't really found his footing. He maybe hasn't really found his voice yet as an author, as a writer. But by now, I'm okay with that because I have read 4 Discworld books now. I understand it. I know what he's kind of growing towards and building towards. So if they're a little bit off, if the first couple books are a little bit off, I will be okay. I won't be scared off by it. So anyways, yeah, now I'm going to go travel back and read The Color of Magic next. So Guards, absolutely loved it, would recommend. Okay, next is Artificial Condition by Martha Wells. This is the second book in the Murderbot Diary series. This book kind of picks up right from where the first book left off, and we continue to follow Murderbot as it tries to understand its past and the kind of horrific event that happened in its past and unlock the secrets of it and why it happened and how it happened. And all the while, it's still trying to understand humans and where it fits, where its place is within humanity or alongside humanity. I rated this book 4 out of 5 stars. I don't really know how invested I am with this series, to be honest, but it is really good. Like I can just tell it's written so well. So I don't know. I'm very confused about it. I think I like this one better than the first book. I didn't really love the plot of the first book. I just wasn't very interested in it. This one is a little bit more interesting, but also I just like that it feels like we're getting in Murderbot's head more. And I think that is especially helped because it meets another kind of intelligent robot. I don't even know what to call it. Another like artificial intelligence called Art. Well, Murderbot calls it Art. That's not really its name. I don't know if it has a name. But anyways, the interactions between Murderbot and Art really reveal a lot about the main character, Murderbot. That's why I think I like this book a lot better than the first. I hope Art comes back in the future. If I decide to continue on with the series, I really hope Art comes back because I loved it so much. I'm interested to see where the story goes. I assume it's just kind of about Murderbot finding its place in the world. I wonder if there's ever like a stronger plot that kind of comes out, because I am interested in Murderbot, the character, but I almost feel like I need a stronger background plot to really be interested in continuing on in the series. I do really like Murderbot as a character. I think it's very relatable and endearing, but I just don't know that that's enough to propel me on through the rest of the series. I just don't know. I might give it one more and see if I'm like hooked and I can't stop reading, because the next book's a shorter novella too. And if I can't get into it, I'm probably just going to give up after the third book and just kind of be happy with what I had. What I do want to say about these books is my biggest complaint is the prose. And I want to be clear that it's not bad in any way. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. It's just that it's a style that I'm not really gelling with. The reason is because I think Martha Wells has an incredible way of sounding like an android. Like, I think she does a great job at making it seem like Murderbot is telling its own story. It's very much written from the perspective of a robot. So she does great on that aspect. But personally, it's not a very easy reading style to me because everything is so non-human sounding. The way that she gets across an idea or even just says a simple sentence is just so different from how you'd normally say it that it takes me a little bit sometimes to be like, what? Sometimes it makes me feel a little dumb, okay? I'm not gonna lie. Like, maybe I do need simpler prose. I don't know. Maybe Mortal Engines is really for me. I don't really know. But it's been hard to get into, and it kind of interrupts my reading flow when I have to go back and try and parse through the language. It kind of becomes unenjoyable. So that all just adds up to having a very confusing reading experience. And I don't know. But overall, I think, especially if you're more familiar with the sci-fi genre and sci-fi language and all that stuff, I don't think this would be a problem. So if you're okay with just a great character to follow and exploring themes, I think you'd probably really like this. I'm confused overall. I have a lot of confusion. Okay, second to last book. We're almost done. So the next book is Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. This book is about an adventuring orc who wants to kind of quit the adventuring life. She wants to quit the questing life, quit her kind of violent life, and open a coffee shop. So this book is just kind of telling the story of how she does that. It's very cozy fantasy. It's low stakes. It's very fun. It's just very different from a lot of fantasy. Just kind of like Discworld. It's very different. If you're wanting something that's not like all the high stakes, high fantasies you've read before, this would be a really nice change of pace. So I rated Legends and Lattes 3 out of 5 stars. I feel very conflicted about it, because I don't think there's anything wrong with it necessarily. It's just that for me, it probably wasn't really the book I needed right now. I think this is really good for people who are tired of world-ending type of stakes and stories and just want something a little more chill. I am not at that point yet in my reading life and my reading journey. I still very much love high stakes. So I wasn't like kind of starved for this type of story or anything. So I didn't really ever get fully invested and fully all that into it. I never got attached to the story, to the characters, to the stakes. This would probably be nice to reread at some point in the future if I am kind of feeling fatigued with high fantasy. But for now, it's just, yeah. It wasn't really for me. I especially just didn't love the characters. I thought they were all really kind of boring. Since it is low stakes, we didn't have a lot of action going on. I really wanted to dig into these characters, but it never really happened. So I didn't love that. Also, almost no one had a distinct character voice, especially between the most main characters, which are Viv and Tandri. however you pronounce that one, those two sounded interchangeable, which is really annoying to me. I really like strong and distinct character voices. So that was kind of annoying the whole way through. So again, overall with this one, I don't think there's anything wrong with it necessarily. And I didn't even know before going in that it needs to be something you're in a mood to read. Like maybe that's not true for everyone, but it was definitely true for me. So it didn't hit hard for me like I think it did for a lot of other people. So anyways, it was a nice book, but I just kind of felt meh. And the last book I have to talk about is This Is How You Lose the Time War by Amal, El-Mohtar, and Max Gladstone. So this is a shorter book. I don't know if it's actually technically a novella or not, but it's on the shorter side. It's about these two agents of two competing time travel organizations. I don't know if you necessarily call it time travel or they just want to control time, the flow of time. And it's about these two agents kind of exchanging letters between time and the bond they kind of form. It's a forbidden kind of relationship, of course, since they're both agents of rival agencies. So I rated this 3 out of 5 stars. Every time I have a 3 out of 5 star, I'm like, it's not bad, it's not good. But that's really, again, how I felt about this one. That's really what the 3-star rating is for, I feel like. This one, I can absolutely see why people love it. I totally get it. But for me, it just didn't ever hit all that hard. And that's because there's a few reasons. First of all, I don't really like stories that are romance first. It's just not my cup of tea. It's a preference thing completely. I think if you do like romance, if you like that angst and yearning, you probably would really like this. And I also don't really love epistolary storytelling, which is like storytelling through letters. And there's some non-letter parts of this book. Like I feel like it's about half and half letters and non-letters. But I don't like the letter storytelling. I don't like it. I feel like Frankenstein and Dracula, which are both completely epistolary novels, have ruined me for that because I didn't like either of those. And those are both completely told through letters. And now I'm just like, I kind of like cringe and shrink up inside a little bit every time I see those in a story. So I'm sorry, but it's just the way it is for me. Both of those aspects, the romance and the letters, I didn't know were going to be aspects of the story before I started. Well, I kind of knew the romance because it's in the synopsis, it's in the book blurb, but I didn't know about the letters, which is also in the blurb, so I should have been expecting it. So I don't know what I was thinking. I also just was seeing people rave about this, so I was like, oh, it's probably good despite all that. But I just didn't end up loving it. The biggest complaint I have about this, though, is that the world building was so confusing. I think if the other aspects of the story were good enough to distract me from the confusing world, I would have been totally fine with it. But because that didn't happen, I was so confused. That also kind of prevented me from ever getting all that deep into the story and the storytelling, because I was just left trying to be like, wait, what's going on? So yeah, all that just kind of added up to not a great experience to me, but also not a terrible one. So that's the end of my wrap up. Those were all the books that I read these past 2 months. If you have any opinions about any of these stories, I would love to know. Even if you disagree with me, I would just love to know. So yeah, that is all for me this time. If you watched this long, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you being here. I know this was a long one. I have put chapters to skip through, but I know it's still going to be very long. So thank you so much and just have a great day. Farewell.